NHL Free Agency wasting no time. The window officially open on Monday, and it's the Predators at the center of the conversation. The franchise committing 9 figures worth of contracts to Brady Shea, Jonathan Marchessault, and Steven Stamkos. That's 3 Cups and a Conn Smythe headed to town on day 1 of free agency. For Stamkos specific, it's a 4-year, $32 million deal, and most notably closes the book on a 16-year career in Tampa, during which he captained and carried a franchise from irrelevance to a pair of Stanley Cups. The 34-year-old still better than a point per game last season with 81 tallies in 79 games. Predators GM Barry Trotz calling Stammer a serial winner, a Hall of Famer, and exactly what a young locker room needs. The Lightning, in turn, getting younger on their wing, filling the void in the form of Jake Guentzel, a 7-year, $63 million deal after acquiring his rights from Carolina in exchange for a 3rd-round pick in next year's draft. And here's a look at some notable free agent moves to get your Monday going. Sam Reinhart staying put, 8 years worth of contract security there at an average annual value north of $8.5 million as the Florida Panthers look to run it back a season from now. In with his reaction, the Prince of the Puck, Pete Blackburn. Pete, relative to some of the money we're seeing thrown around in other sports, the hockey dollar still seems short, but this was a historic day for the NHL. More than $1 billion worth of contracts committed in the first 24 hours of free agency. What does this sort of deal-making mean for the trajectory of the league in your eyes?
I mean, I think it's encouraging, right? You like to see money thrown around. You like to see the money be available to be thrown around. It's not the NBA where some guy I've never heard of gets like $200 million on a contract, but it's still pretty good here that a lot of these guys are getting paid. And I think the term, when you look at how many guys got term, like these 6-7-year deals, is really impressive for their sake. You know, it was kind of a player's market out there. So, you know, teams were not shy to commit, and they were not shy to throw money around. And you mentioned it, $1 billion cleared for the first time. So that's a good sign for the league, I suppose.
Money earned for some of the hardest workers in sports. Let's get to some of these deals now. The Preds retooling with some massive names of note, no doubt about it. The recognition is there after that first-round exit against Vancouver, trying to reposition themselves. How do you like this series of moves for the Predators? What stands out to you?
I like it a lot. I mean, what stands out to me is that this is an expedited rebuild. This is one of the quickest rebuilds we've seen in a while. You remember last summer, David Poile, their longtime GM, stepped down. They bought out a couple of their quote-unquote star players at the time, and they didn't know what this season was going to be. They turned a bridge year into a pretty good expedited bridge year. They made the playoffs, and now I think they're taking another step forward here. You've got star power in Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, 2 guys that know how to win, have won Stanley Cups. And then I don't necessarily love the Brady Shea contract, but he is a good player, and he's a good player who's going to solidify their blue line. I like that add in terms of the player. The financial commitment is a bit more than I'd like, maybe even in Stamkos's end as well. But if you're talking about trying to compete for a Stanley Cup and bring this team together and build for the future, these are a lot of good guys to do so around.
Certainly seems so. The Lightning then backfilling and getting about a contract younger in the form of Jake Guentzel. What you lose in leadership with Stamkos can't really be replaced in the near term, but does Guentzel, in your eyes, supplement the production lost?
Not really. I like Jake Guentzel a lot. I think he's a great player, but he plays on the wing. And I know Steven Stamkos played on the wing quite a bit in Tampa as well. But when you're talking about who the Tampa Bay Lightning are committing money to, their best players are now on the wings, and I don't know if that's the way that you win in this league. You know, you have Nikita Kucherov and Jake Guentzel as your 2 best wingers, and obviously those are 2 really good players. But you also subtracted Steven Stamkos, you subtracted Mikhail Sergachev on the back end to help make room for this money to bring in Jake Guentzel, and then you supplanted him with Ryan McDonough. So I think you're talking about a worse team today than they were about a few months ago. So I don't really love what the Tampa Bay Lightning are doing, especially when you consider the fact that Steven Stamkos is a Mount Rushmore Tampa Bay Lightning player. He's been one of the more important and most impactful players in the history of that franchise, and they've kind of pushed him out the door here in an unceremonious way.
And seeming to get younger there, but we'll see what Tampa looks like. Obviously, the success in the form of Stamkos with those back-to-back cups, but as we know, with them and now Florida hockey's home has been more sand than snow this last half-decade. The defending champs moving some pieces as well on day one of free agency. Montour, Ekman-Larsson, Lomberg, Stenlund out, but 8 years worth of the man who delivered the Game 7 game winner, Sam Reinhart, earning some fresh ink. Pete, climbing that mountain a second time is obviously a rarity. Are the pieces in place in your eyes for this group to do it again?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think their culture and their structure and their coaching is still going to remain, obviously. And you took care of a giant piece of business with Sam Reinhart right before the midnight deadline to keep him around for 8 years. And I like that contract. Listen, the way that this league is structured, you're often going to have to take some really difficult losses after you put together a Stanley Cup roster. And that's exactly what we're seeing for Florida here. Brandon Montour is a tough loss on the back end. So is Oliver Ekman-Larsson for what he brought for the dollar value this year. And when I look at the contracts that both of those guys got, I certainly don't blame Florida for not dishing them out and trying to keep them at that dollar value. And, I think the biggest piece of business was Sam Reinhart, and they made some nice depth adds as well. So they're in an okay position here. It's a net loss, but you always knew that it was going to be given where their roster was heading into this offseason.
All right, let's talk winners and losers. I want you to just take me off the board here, whatever you like, Pete. People that really stole your attention here day one in the first few hours of free agency. Your biggest winner out of day one is who?
I mean, it's Nashville. It's hard to go in any other direction. They're so much better of a team heading into next year than they were when we started today. And they made a shockwave with the Steven Stamkos signing, and then getting Jonathan Marchessault as an ancillary piece, and then really rounding it about with Brady Shea. Like, they've improved down the middle. They've improved on the wing. They've improved on the back end. They've added some dynamic forces and leadership to their group. And so I really like what they've done here in kind of pushing their group forward and pushing this team that unexpectedly emerged as a contender. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that they locked up UC Saros, their prime-time goaltender, long term. So this is a team that's well positioned right now.
It's going to be a jarring sweater change for Stammer there into shades of yellow from the blue we've known so well. Talk to me about a loser. Who did you not like the strategy and execution from a front office here on day one?
The Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken needed to do something. They needed to make some big splashes, and I don't dislike the players that they added. Talked about Brandon Montour earlier. The contract that they gave him, I think they significantly overpaid for a 30-year-old defenseman. 7 years at over $7 million. I don't think that he's that kind of player at this point in his career. That's a significant gamble. He's going to make them better, but the back end of that contract is going to be pretty rough. And I think the same can be said for Chandler Stevenson, who is a really nice complementary piece, but he doesn't really drive play down the middle. And to pay 7 years and $6.25 million is a lot. And I think that both of those deals are going to hurt them in the long term while making them a little bit better in the short term. So I think those ones are going to age pretty poorly.
Roster's taking shape and taking on new faces here on day one of free agency. Our guy Pete Blackburn bringing us all the latest. Thank you, Pete. All right, here's a look at the odds to do it again next season. And according to our friends at FanDuel, the Panthers and Oilers, this year's matchup, most likely to do so. 9-1 money there. As you take a look at some others in the Stars and Devils, not far behind, around 10-1 money. The Leafs and Rangers, hopefuls, 15-1, edging into this top 8.